there. That's it. That's what you should, that little piece you just said, you got to play that for every entrepreneur. Gaining that insight, it took me 50 years to get that insight. Netflix was one of 6 companies I've had a hand in starting, and I've had a lot of successes. It was only after I left Netflix and had a chance to work with hundreds of early stage companies that I began to accumulate some of the insights about what are the patterns that allow smaller companies to take on bigger ones. What are the patterns that allow big companies to successfully defend themselves? What are the patterns of entrepreneurship? It would have been an error to say, oh, look how smart I was at Netflix. That would be the ultimate in hubris, and it would have been a disservice because I would never have really known which of the things it did there, like you said, were we succeeded in spite of me or because of me.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is very special. It's the co-founder of Netflix, Marc Randolph. He served as their first CEO, but later left and founded multiple other successful businesses, including another unicorn. He's mentored dozens of successful entrepreneurs. He's also the author of the best-selling memoir, That Will Never Work, The Birth of Netflix. He also has a podcast with the same name, which is very interesting because he offers live mentoring to aspiring entrepreneurs and tells them why the idea wouldn't work and how to make it work in reality. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's filled with golden nuggets of information. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Marc. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks. It's great to be with you.
So obviously you're best known for Netflix and everything you've done since then, but I'm really curious to understand, how did you get down this path in the first place? What got you into entrepreneurship?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that I've been doing this for a long time. I mean, I think I've been pursuing entrepreneurial things for more than 40 years now. And so back when I started, there wasn't this thing about entrepreneurship. I mean, there weren't books, magazine covers, and TV shows and movies. And maybe there were entrepreneurs, there certainly were, but no one talked about it. And so when I started, I think I was more drawn to it, compelled to it, rather than choosing it for any particular outcome I expected. I just realized I just loved solving problems. I loved finding a hole and filling it. I loved seeing something which inexplicably wasn't working and wondering if there was some better way to do it. And I'm not saying this was me starting multinational corporations, but even when I was a teenager, I was the person who was always starting a club or putting on a production or launching a magazine or doing something that I thought would be interesting that I had to enlist other people to help me. So luckily, it turned out many years later, you could actually make a living at that, which is probably one of the most fortunate breaks of my life, because otherwise I always think I would have been chronically unemployable.
What was that very first company you created? So you worked for other people for a little time at the beginning, right? And then you went into...
Again, the entrepreneurship, the way I define it, isn't necessarily something that you're doing as a commercial venture, that it has to be a company. I mean, entrepreneurship at its loosest definition is someone who's just trying something that really hasn't been tried before, starting something from scratch. And I think it applies to almost any time someone has a dream. And it could be as simple as, I want a different job, I want a different apartment, I want to live in a different city, I'm working at a big company and I want to somehow try some new thing with my job. Those are all entrepreneurship. So probably my earliest experience was one of my first jobs, and I was 6 or 7 years old, young, and I was selling seeds, like you grow plants or vegetables with, door to door for the American Seed Company. And it was classic door-to-door salesmanship. You go knock, and if someone opens the door, you say, "Hi, I'm selling seeds," and they either engage or they slam the door shut in your face. And I think more times than not, I had the door slammed in my face. And that was probably this first clue that rather than sulking home and watching TV or, doing something like that, I was challenged what can I do to get someone to actually let me try? And then once I began selling, I'd go, how can I sell more? How can I convince them to buy additionals? Can I do, if you buy 3, you get a 4th one free? I mean, just this weird experimentation thing that somehow I found that part, that when someone didn't buy from me, it wasn't this disappointment. It was, oh, okay, that didn't work. What do I try next? And that's really never stopped. Quite a few years later, I was still in my early 20s. I landed this weird job as, now they call it chief of staff, but really you're just a gopher. You're just following the CEO around doing whatever they want. And this is at a music publishing company, which had all these divisions. It had, print and publishing and blah, blah, blah. And they had this division, which was a mail order division, which is grossly overstating what it was. It was basically just a couple of lines of print in the back of a songbook that said, for a list of more great Cherry Lane songbooks, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to so-and-so. And the mail order division there was some poor soul whose job it was to take these self-addressed stamped envelope, make a copy of the list of more songbooks, put it in the envelope, mail it out. And for some weird reason, I said, I want that job. And CEO goes, well, you believe me, you've got it. I then began teaching myself direct marketing and direct response, and built, I guess they call that an entrepreneur, I suppose, but within this existing company, built this big mail order division, which eventually became, we did catalogs, we did direct mail, did direct response television, but it was building this company purely out of the curiosity of how does this work? So that really was the culmination. But by that point, I'd been doing all the things that entrepreneurs do for 10, 15 years. I'd been saying, here's where we're going, even when I wasn't quite clear where we were going. I was enlisting people to help me, even when there was no apparent reason why they should do so. I was overcoming obstacles. And so this was just doing that for the first time, I guess, for real.
And I guess you talked about this before in terms of you really love the early stages and the experimentation phase of business. And it's what you cover on your own podcast, right? About people who have got an idea and they're not sure exactly how it's going to work, and they're enjoying that process. And you think that's a key trait for entrepreneurs. And that's what separates people with that kind of mindset and who are going to be able to do well in it from other people who maybe that's not the right path from them.
Well, that's very, very true. And it touches on this interesting thing, which is the reasons that people these days choose to be entrepreneurs. And it pains me a little bit, because I genuinely think that a lot of people are choosing it for the wrong reasons, because of the popularity it's gotten that I referred to earlier, because of the fact there's Shark Tank on television, and there's, the Social Network movie, and it's glorified entrepreneurship. People think it's this path to wealth and fame, which of course it's not, except for the very, 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 very few lucky ones. But what it is this chance to solve puzzles all day for a living, to basically come to work and sit around the table with super smart people and solve really interesting problems. And if you're drawn to that, this is the most unbelievable job there is. But you've got to be drawn to that. You've got to recognize that there's a flip side to that, which is that almost everything you try isn't going to work. And so if you are wired to, I only like doing something that I'm sure that I'm going to be successful at it, you're going to be very, very unhappy and disappointed. And it's not a common trait, because all of us are kind of hardwired to not want to do something we're not sure it's going to work. We don't want to make an ass of ourselves. We don't want to make mistakes or look like we're incapable. And I think being a good entrepreneur requires suspending that belief and being willing to make an ass of yourself.
Yeah, and people might look at you and know that you've created Netflix and you've created so many successful businesses, and think that you don't have that doubt and that you go into every problem head on. Do you still have doubt? Do you still worry and wonder whether you've made the right decisions?
Well, boy, I'm going to say yes and no. So the one way of phrasing it, Do I now have great confidence in all of my decisions? Of course, no, not at all. Zero. But do I still have doubts? No, not at all. What's happened to me starting when I was 6 or 7 and becoming more and more reinforced over time is that I don't even think about it anymore. I mean, I am completely confident about trying things that I have no idea if they're going to work. Trying things that, in fact, if I really stopped and thought about it, I'm pretty sure they're not going to work. I talked just a moment ago about how it's this fundamental belief, fundamental human fear of making a fool. And I don't know, whether you're fluent in a second or third language, but getting to that point for someone requires that you've got to put yourself out there. You've studied, you've learned vocabulary, you know grammar, but then you walk into a coffee shop and you're a 40-year-old man and you open your mouth and out comes something that a fifth grader would say. And most people don't want that. They get it all prepared in their mind. Is I'm sure it's right. And then they trot it out, and that's not how you learn how to speak. And it's not how you learn how to be an entrepreneur either. You've got to open your mouth and just talk. And I've been doing that for so long. I now not only do I not have second thoughts about anything, I look forward to it. It's such a learning experience to try something. You got me going here, but the challenge, the analogy for this is the person who is starting down some path which goes around a corner, and they go, "Gosh, what's going to happen here?" And they stand, they're looking, and they're trying to see their way around the corner, and they're trying to ask people coming back, "What's it like?" They're trying to learn everything they can, so that when they start, they know that everything's going to be fine. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going. And let's see what's around the corner. And if it's something scary and terrible, well, fine, I can run pretty fast the opposite direction. And that's what entrepreneurship is. And that's the thing that you get. If you're good at this job, you get better and better and better at doing ridiculous things that no one thinks is going to work. Not because you're sure they're going to work, but because you don't care, because you're mostly just interested in finding out whether it is going to work or not. And it's that process of trial and error. Success is proportionate to how many things you try, and how many things you try is proportionate to how quickly and cheaply and easily you do them.
Yeah, and I think for so many people, whether it's however big you want to be in terms of entrepreneurship, whether it's just a lifestyle business or if you want to do a hyper-growth startup, the first thing is you've got to put yourself out there. Because if nobody ever sees your product or nobody ever sees your idea, then you never really know if it's going to work. And there's always that problem if sometimes people, like you said, they keep planning. They keep being like, oh, this could happen or that could happen. But at some point, you've got to test it.
Well, you mentioned earlier about, what is this defining characteristic of an entrepreneur? And I think that is it, which is they think less and they do more. Or to put it in a more fancy way, they have a predisposition to action. They'll say, rather than going, well, maybe this, they'll go, let's figure out now a quick way we can collide the idea with reality. Because what's in your head doesn't count. What the experts say don't count. What counts is what happens when you collide that idea with a real person. And that's the trick. You've got to figure out how to collide the idea as quickly as you can. As you know, I have a podcast where I work with early stage entrepreneurs. I don't interview them. I'm mentoring them live during these shows. So I have heard pretty much every single possible excuse for why people don't get started. And I've never yet heard one which I believe is a legitimate reason why you should continue to study the problem or form a task force or do additional research. Every time you'll benefit more from trying it than you will thinking about it. And especially the big one is someone's going to steal my idea, which is the most tragic error of all, because the idea counts for nothing. 1% is the idea. Execution is 99%. And by not starting because you're scared your idea is going to be stolen, ironically, you're protecting the part of the process which is only 1% and preventing yourself from doing the part of the process which is 99%. You just got to do it. You just got to say, let's see what happens. And you'll realize how flawed your idea is. You'll begin that process that every entrepreneur goes through, which is going, wow, I was thinking about this entirely the wrong way. That's what entrepreneurship is.
Yeah, and I think with the idea stage as well, I've had people who ask me to sign NDAs when it's to see their idea, and you must have the same thing all the time. But I look at that and say, well, what is it about you that will make this work? Because if the thing you have to protect is the idea, because you don't think you can execute it better than other people, then you haven't really got an idea. Like, how is that going to be successful if as soon as somebody else knows the idea, you're not confident enough to believe that you're the one who's going to be able to make that belief, that dream real?
Well, it's worse than that. I mean, protecting the idea is stupid. Listen, there are exceptions. If you're a pharmaceutical company and you've tested 17,000 compounds and finally found the 17,001st compound that works, yes, don't tell people that until you've had a chance to figure out how to put it in place and protect it. That's not how the rest of the world works. Ideas don't count for anything. Your idea, it's flawed. I promise it's a bad idea. Every idea is a bad idea. Your job as the entrepreneur is to figure out why your idea is a bad idea and begin that process of the modification over and over again. I mean, when we had the idea for Netflix, which was the video rental by mail, everyone told me that'll never work, which is why the podcast is called That Will Never Work. And the book is called That Will Never Work, but that'll never work. And what a surprise, they're right. It was a terrible idea, but that's fine. Well, we'll try something else. Took us a year and a half to finally land on the business model, which actually was repeatable and scalable and allowed us to have a real business. But if we had said we can't start because this idea is so precious, we're protecting something which didn't work. And there's two things. Every successful company has become successful not with the idea they originally started with. It's modified. And the second thing is that every idea is almost no idea is original. I promise you, this idea that you think is such a genius thing, someone's already thought of that. It's how well you manage that process of starting there and learning what the problem is. It's execution. And that is person.
And with Netflix, what do you think that you did in the execution that allowed you and Reed to take it as big as it did, that other people didn't do? What were they missing?
There's a couple things. First of all, Reed and I were in our mid to late 30s when we did Netflix. And so we had some experience. And so we kind of knew what some of these important things to get to that point was. But that said, there was a critical thing we learned and did, which I think became one of the most important lessons that came out of that whole time, which is originally we knew that it wasn't going to work as designed, that we were going to have to keep trying things. Our problem, if there was one, was that at the beginning, all of our original tests were these little works of art. I can look back now and laugh at it, but we kind of felt like if we're really going to try something, we've got to take our best shot at it. And so we designed these beautiful tests with custom photography, and we'd argue over every word of copy, and we'd stress test the site and double check every link. And it might take us 2 or 3 weeks to put a test together. And then it would fail, and we'd realize, oh shit, we've just wasted 3 weeks. So we go a little faster, and that would fail. We go faster and faster and faster. And then pretty soon we're doing multiple tests every day. And there's, not surprisingly, broken links, and we're crashing the site, and there's misspellings, and we have the wrong photos in, and it's really crappy. But what we learned was it didn't make a difference. That if you had a bad idea, no matter how beautifully executed your test was not going to make it a success. But the real insight was, if it was a good idea, then even the biggest piece of garbage people would still raise their hands and they'd call us up and they'd knock on the door. And you knew then, okay, that's what we have to fix, that it was not precious, and that the key was not coming up with good ideas. It was not brainstorming and studying. It was building this system and this process and this culture to test hundreds of bad ideas. And that became the Netflix method, which was we tested more than any. It wasn't that we were smarter. We just tested more than anybody else by an order of magnitude of 100. And that just allowed us to move so much faster toward taking what we learned and applying it and taking us down this completely random path to where the subscription model that ultimately is what transformed the business.
I think the same thing is true in content creation and people building brands online as well, is that they try so hard at the beginning to get it perfect. But if nobody's following you or if there's nobody engaging with your content, it doesn't really matter. Like, you've got to try to find the message that resonates with people first. And if people start resonating with you, then you can get the pretty pictures and then you can do all the other stuff. I think that's quite similar to the Netflix site, where what was really important is you had a model that people agreed with and that people resonated with. And then you can fix all the little bits and pieces. And I think it's quite easy for people to really focus on the tiny details at the beginning, because it's easier. Because if you focus on that, then that's in your control. But as you said, you've got to put it out there and you've got to just let it be ripped apart. And that's how it gets better and that's how it improves.
I think you're entirely right. I mean, certainly this other key attribute of entrepreneurship is focus and triage. It's recognizing that there's 100 things you should get right, but really there's one or maybe two out of the 100 that if you get those right, the rest don't matter. I mean, they matter in a peripheral, the people might be upset or, wow, we're making these big mistakes, but they don't really matter when it comes to, have I made big progress toward proving this idea, figuring out a way for my idea to actually become effective. And that skill to somehow intuitively know what those one or two things are, even though other things are more visible or more loud or burning hotter, and say, those are the two. And then having the discipline to take all your resources and put them on those is a really hard, but a critical thing. If you take the resources you have and spread them evenly over the 30 or 40 things, we need to have an invoicing system. We need to have a better customer service. We need to have the ability to, you're going to end up not putting enough focus on the one or two things that you really have to get right, which could be product, it could be sales, it could be it's different in every business. That's the skill, is what is that one or two things.
And I hope you're enjoying the show so far. We're going to share a quick message from our sponsors. Digital Surgeons is an independently owned, forward-obsessed brand experience consultancy based in the United States. I've had the pleasure of interviewing both founders for this show. Pete Sennett was episode 6, and David Salinas was episode 14. I believe in their vision that design is about so much more than just how things look. It's about how it makes people feel. You feel me? They've shared some of their incredible success stories. They count Lady Gaga and Unilever as previous clients, but I've worked with many less mainstream brands, such as Lovesac Furniture and Fresh Pet Foods, who delivered significant year-on-year growth. Right now, their focus on high-growth categories includes beverage, cannabis, blockchain, pet, D2C, and health and wellness. More simply said, if you want to launch a business, call them. If you need to pivot an existing business, call them. To learn more, check the show notes or check out www.digitalsurgeons.com. You've learned so much from iterating over time and all the different businesses you've had. But if there's one thing which you wish that you could tell a young Mark like 30 years ago, that he wouldn't have to go through the same process he went through to learn the lessons you did, what do you think you could shortcut, or if you just had the right mindset at that time, it could have made things easier for you?
I should have bought maybe Google stock 20 years ago. I should have told my younger self that. That would have been or Apple. That would have been a good advice to give a younger Mark. But in all seriousness, I don't have regrets like that. And it's partly because I don't think life works like that,
Hmm.
because success, if you want to use that as this end point, is not almost never the result of getting one thing right or one not getting one thing wrong. It's a combination of things, and you really never can understand, looking backwards, which things was I which was successful in spite of what I did or because of what I did. And that's one of the big mysteries. So it's like a time travel movie, which I love time travel movies, but you don't want to mess with the past because you always have these unintended consequences. And I think the thing that you just asked me to go through is some level of that. You look back at the huge elements of luck in one's career. I mean, hugely lucky in a million ways. But I've told that story about Blockbuster almost buying us, which at the time I was hugely disappointed in. That was going to be our way to save the company, and when that didn't happen, I thought I had really screwed it up horrendously. So was that a mistake? Were the things that I was ineffective in pitching or presenting mistakes? Well, maybe, but certainly the outcome, they were not mistakes if you want to measure it by the outcome. I chose to bet this company on DVD at a time when there was virtually no DVD players there, and DVD could easily have gone the way of the Laserdisc or gone the way of the Betamax. So was it a mistake to have bet it on that? Well, that one turned out to have been a good bet. But that's the thing. Who the hell knows?
Yeah.
Mystery
And I think that's a really interesting point there, because you often hear of so many people talk about their journey with the survivorship bias of, I did the right thing because the outcome was right. And when other people try to replicate that, they don't get the same results. And like I said, it's the luck factor. And a lot of people, in hindsight bias, they explain a story around, oh, I was successful because I did that. And like I said, it's often in spite of that, where somebody might have had a bad habit that was actually holding them back. But because of the way that fate goes, or because an opportunity opened up, which had nothing to do with that habit, they then say it was because of that habit, that's why this happened. And like I said, it's so dangerous to do that. So I really like
that right there. That's it. That's what you should, that little piece you just said, you got to play that for every entrepreneur. Gaining that insight. It took me 50 years to get that insight. I wrote, That Will Never Work, which the book about the starting and growing Netflix was written 16 years after I left Netflix, because it took me that long to really begin to gain some insight in what did I do good? What did I do poorly? What made a difference one way or the other? And that only happened, back up. Netflix was one of 6 companies I've had a hand in starting, and I've had a lot of successes, 2 very big successes. But you can't learn even from a pattern set of 6. It's too small. It was only after I left Netflix and had a chance to work with hundreds of early stage companies that I began to accumulate some of the insights about what are the patterns that allow smaller companies to take on bigger ones. What are the patterns that allow big companies to successfully defend themselves? What are the patterns of entrepreneurship? And they didn't necessarily, it would have been an error to say, oh, look how smart I was at Netflix. That would be the ultimate in hubris, and it would have been a disservice, because I would never have really known which of the things that did there, like you said, we succeeded in spite of me or because of me.
Do you think the way you look at success itself has changed over the years, where when you were at the beginning of your career and what you considered a successful business was or a successful lifestyle was, is that still the same thing now? Or do you look back and think you could have done things, well, not done things differently, as we say, we don't want to change the past, but you have different priorities now and different things matter to you?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think I've said how important I believe luck has been in my career. a lot of things broke the right way for me, but I was prepared for things to break the right way. I was prepared for them to break against me, but still, I had a lot of luck. But one of the lucky breaks was that I had a fairly profound, for myself, not world profound for me, insight when I was just about your age. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was, loving entrepreneurship. I was kind of on my, at that point, third company, working like crazy, nights, weekends, all the time. And I realized, maybe with some help from my girlfriend, who is now my wife, that my girlfriend, now my wife, was not really getting the attention she deserved. So I'll take credit for recognizing that, even though it may not have been entirely me. But I did. It resonated with me that that's not what I wanted. That I did not want to be the entrepreneur on his sixth company and his sixth wife. I wanted to have this relationship with this woman. I wanted to have children. I wanted to have that be important to me. And the insight was not that I wanted that, because everyone wants that. The insight was that if I wanted those things, I'd have to build a life that allowed that to happen. Not quitting my job and moving to Montana and being a postman, but still being an entrepreneur, which still had these hour requirements and time of day requirements. Was it possible to do that and maintain a relationship? And just to make my job even harder, there was three things I wanted out of life. I wanted, be an entrepreneur. I wanted to have the relationship with my wife and family, but I'm an outdoorsy kind of guy. I mean, I love backcountry skiing and mountain biking and surfing and kayaking and mountain climbing. And those are not easy things to squeeze in. It's not like, honey, I'll be back in an hour. I'm going to fly up to northern Alaska and spend 2 weeks canoeing some wilderness river. I'll be back in an hour. No, you've got to construct a life to make that possible. And I had came to that conclusion in my late 20s, early 30s, and have spent most of my life working very, very hard on how do I put all three of those pieces together. Not always entirely successfully, but it's always been this objective. And I'm now 63. Now, six companies, two of them were multi-billion-dollar companies. So my scorecard is good in the entrepreneurship category, but I'm not necessarily proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that I did that and have stayed married to that same woman for 35 years, that have had 3 kids who've grown up to know me, and best I can tell, like me, and still get a chance to go out mountain biking and canoeing and backcountry skiing and surfing and do all those things. And that's what I'm proud of. And that is the life accomplishment that I really worked hard at, and I'm really happy that I was able to pull off.
Do you think of making time for the other things that are important in your life? How much of that was you battling yourself and your ambitions with the entrepreneurship side? And how much was you battling with other people, so let's say the investors or people you work with, who wanted more time from you? Which do you think was kind of harder to manage to make sure you had the time for your family and your outdoor activities?
Oh, you're touching on a critical piece that you have to understand, which is, it's really easy to say how important balance is, and it's easy to print up a poster and put it in the break room, and it's really easy to do an Instagram post about balance. It's brutally hard to pull it off. And it only works, but it's brutally hard to start a company, but it's the exact same thing. You say, this is important to me. I'm going to make this happen, and I'm going to figure it out. And you learn tricks and tips over the years to manage those things. I mean, I'll give you 2 quick ones. Both of these I've talked about before because they resonate so strongly with me. But one is that, early on in my early 30s, once I was dedicated to this thing, as I said, let's just put some structure here. Every Tuesday night, date night, we're my wife and I'm leaving at 5 o'clock, which, in Silicon Valley, 5 o'clock is basically when you go to lunch. because the hours are crazy. So you go 5 o'clock, I'm out of here. My wife getting a sitter. We're time for ourselves, and brutal, but really hard. But it got to the point where I go, okay, is there a crisis? We're going to wrap the crisis up by 5. You have to talk to me. We're talking on the way to the car. And it was an amazing thing that after a few months of this, well, amazingly enough, the crises stopped happening on Tuesdays at 5. And more importantly, for someone who believes that culture has to be modeled, I can say, I believe everyone should have balance in their life as loudly as I want, but nothing speaks that louder than actually showing that it's important enough to me to do something about it. All right. So that's just basically force of will. You're in London, is that right? Or somewhere in England?
Yeah, London, yeah.
So I lived in Paris for about a year and a half in my early 30s. And I was managing marketing for a big international software company. And I was traveling 4 days a week to our European offices. I'd fly to London for a day trip once a week. I'd go to Milan, I'd go to Copenhagen. It's all over the place. So I spent a ton of time in airports and stuck in traffic and running, and I'd be racing to the terminal trying to get my plane. And about 2/3 of the way through the year, it dawned on me, this is a waste of time. Because half the time when I go racing for the plane, I pull up to the gate and I can see the plane, it's taxiing away. And no matter how fast I sprinted, it wasn't enough to make the difference. But interestingly, the other half of the time that I ran for the plane, I'd pull up to the gate and they go, I'm sorry, today's flight to London is delayed by 45 minutes. And I'm just sitting there going, that was completely a waste of a sweat. That it almost never made a difference. And that from that point on, never, rest of my life, I've never run for a plane again. But what I've realized is that it's a metaphor for business too, because how many times are people up at 2 o'clock in the morning finalizing their pitch, the presentation, or they're going, everyone make sure I want to check over your presentations and you're correcting grammar and fixing a font and all that stuff is running for a plane. You're doing these little things which take this incremental effort that almost never make the difference. That you lose that deal not at 2 o'clock in the morning the night before. You lose it 2 weeks when you didn't put some fundamental thing in place. And that once you realize that so many things don't make a difference, you're spending your time getting things perfect, it frees you up to begin realizing this is a smartness game. This is me allocating my time and attention to the few things that make a difference. And you heard at the beginning of our conversation alluding to the fact that that's a key element to entrepreneurship. And I was talking about what you choose to focus on in terms of what the important aspects of a business to get right. But it also applies to your own life. You don't need to run for a plane. It doesn't make a difference. Use that time for something else.
I think a lot of the time people look up advice about how to be more productive in their working hours. And then it's also, why not use that for your whole life? Like, why not prioritize what matters in your life? Why are you only prioritizing things for work or for income? But if spending time with your family is important, you can use the same models as you said there of like, well, I don't want to spend my time watching TV. Maybe I want to spend my time going on a date with your wife, as you did. And it's picking those things. And it's weird, I think, sometimes how much attention people pay to how they spend their time when they're at work, but not when they're outside of work in the same way of what really matters to them. And you said about making time to go to Alaska for 2 weeks. And a lot of people don't think about that. They think about like, okay, I need to get as much done as possible rather than how do I fill my life with experiences I want to have in there?
Yeah. I mean, there's a simple truth that if you don't really know where you're trying to go, odds are very unlikely you're going to end up there. And it doesn't happen, at least for me, it doesn't just happen. You have to plan it. I mean, I do a lot of planning in my business life about not necessarily figuring out what I'm going to do in 3 weeks, because again, I do more and think less, but I certainly lay out what some of my big objectives are. I do prioritize how I'm going to spend my time at work, and I do it at home too. I mean, I do write a business plan for myself, at least to say, what are some of the important things I'd like to accomplish this year? What will I have to do to really get those done? What habits do I have which I don't like, which I want to try and fix? These aren't New Year's resolutions. These are built into my whole 52-week-a-year life, just to ensure that I'm not wasting, I don't mind wasting time, but that I'm not wasting my life here. And if one of the objectives is, like, this is going to sound weird, it's a little bit, me being in therapy here, but just the other night I was talking to my wife and saying, it's really funny. I struggle with with spending time not doing anything. It's hard to sit down and do the crossword puzzle. It's hard to sit down and just chill. I always feel like I should be getting something done. So I have to adjust in the other direction. But, now that once you have that insight, you go, what can I do to try and really make sure that I'm comfortable taking a bunch of time to just sit and read or nothing? Anyway, I'm still right. Listen, anyone thinks that anyone has solved it, they're deluding themselves. Everyone's work in progress.
And what does really motivate you at the moment? What are the big things that you want to do in life at the moment? What are the things that matter to you right now?
I've kind of I had this revelation. You can tell things come to me that I then go recognize as an insight and then act on. This one, it happened. It's a long story, so I won't tell the whole thing. But I was asked to come and present something to a conference, and it was about basically finding your purpose. It was people who have achieved a lot in their life, but are going, now what do I do? What do I do with my wealth or my fame or whatever it is? And since I've done all this work about how do you make active steps in taking an idea and trying to make it real, which is the foundations of entrepreneurship, they asked me to speak. And I was in this beautiful location, and I went, fine, I'll go do my speech. And then my wife and I will spend 3 days on the beach. And so after my speech, I go, I'm just going to stick around and see what this finding your purpose stuff's all about. And it was totally drawn in. And then, basically none of the sunscreen got used. I just spent the whole next 3 days sitting there engrossed in this thing, because it made me realize that I'd gotten to this point where I could show up to give a keynote speech and, 6,000 people would show, get an hour with them. And what did I do? How do I use that? And it was this recognition that there was something that I felt strongly with, which is that thing we've talked about before, that all these skills that I've learned as an entrepreneur that, that you're helping people grasp as well, are not just for people who want to do an app or a new social network. It's really the exact same tools you can use to make anything happen in your life that you want to change. And that became this focus for me. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I launched the podcast. That's why I do the writing I do on my blog. That's why I produce content for Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn and TikTok and all that stuff. That's become this passion, which is, I don't need everybody, but if there's one person out there or two people out there who are at some dead end job and they're going, God, I would love to have a lifestyle business. And if I can give them the tools to unlock how to make that happen, that's purpose.
Yeah. And I think what you said there as well about, it's not just about business, because it could be a project you do on the side. It could be that you create a volunteering project, and that could give you that meaning in your life where you really love that. And sometimes I think people mix those up, right? They think, I've got to create a business or something that makes money. And it comes from this false idea of ikigai, where I think you've heard the Japanese concept ikigai, where it's been misinterpreted in the Western world as something where you need to make money from it. But that's not what the original Japanese concept is. The original Japanese concept is just things that give you joy. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because let's say somebody's a full-time parent or full-time carer. They're not earning any money. But that doesn't mean that they can't have a purpose. And I think that's one of the ways of looking at things as well, is that the skills that you can learn from studying entrepreneurship or building projects, they can apply to all areas of your life as well. And I think that can help so many people.
I completely agree with you. I think that viewing it as this is a great way to bring the whole thing full circle. Is, we started out by saying that it's tragic that people get into entrepreneurship for the wrong reasons, and they do it because they want to be rich, or they want to be famous, or they want to make a lot of money, or whatever their reasons are. And that's not what it's about. It's really fundamentally about accomplishing something, anything you want to get accomplished. And, so listen, everybody who's ever taken a shower has had an idea. It's whether you get out and, as Nolan Bushnell says, towel off and do something about it that makes a difference. And if you are focused on filtering it by what you can make money at, you're going to miss your shot. And there's so much joy to be had from doing it. So don't quit your day job. Don't drop out of college. Don't, just do something on the side. Do something for the fun of it. And sometimes what happens will surprise you.
And I think that's true of your career as well, where you've done so many different things. And it's not like you started something when you were 12 or when you were 6 and you're still selling seeds now and seeds is your life purpose. It's more about you love the process itself. And I think when you love that process, that leads to much more fulfillment. And it also probably makes you better as an entrepreneur because you're enjoying that, but it's not something that you have to do because you want to get money. It's that bit that brings you alive.
None of the companies that started were done because of the money. None of them. Listen, all of them were ridiculous ideas. All of them, who would have thought this is ever going to work? And no one could have said which ones would be which. It just, some of them work, some of them don't. And listen, I'm different, and I accept that. Not that I'm more talented or special than anybody. I am now playing in a different. It's like I play baseball or I play football, whatever, soccer, whatever you want, at a very high level. And so, yes, that you get paid well, and I do it. I'm here in Silicon Valley. But listen, I still would love the game, no matter what level I was playing it at. And that's what brings you in. And that should be what brings you in. So, that was a bad analogy. You can't get them all right.
So I could talk to you for hours, but I'm going to let you go. For people listening today and they want to hear more about you and more about what's going on at the moment with you, where would you like to send them?
So probably the best place to start, ground zero, so to speak, is my website, which is marcrandolph.com. And that's Marc with a C and Randolph with a PH.com, because there you can get links to my podcast. There you can get links to all the things I'm writing. There you can find out about my book. Probably the best way to really listen in as I'm coaching people through the real hardships of taking ideas and making them real is in the podcast. It's called That Will Never Work. It's available any place that you get your podcasts from.
Perfect. Thank you again for coming on.
It's been my pleasure, and thanks for having me.